While today's game might seem like a version of Battle Brothers, in which you are fighting zombies in a post-apocalyptic world, it's actually a very different type of game, which puts less of a focus on deep tactical decisions within battles and has some other priorities instead. This is also why I wouldn't call Mutant Meltdown, which had been released in September 2022, a tactics game, but rather a 5 to 10 hour long, with an asterisk, survival strategy game with permadeath. GoldenGodGames, the studio behind this game, already published a couple of similar looking hex games in the past, most notably Z-Dawn in 2019, which you probably wouldn't be able to tell apart if you just had a short look at some footage. Besides of the visual similarity, its game mechanics are also the basis for this new game, which adds some new mechanics like radiation and mutations, which means that we are not just fighting mere zombies anymore, but zombie mutants. But let's have a deeper look at what we can expect in Mutant Meltdown, besides of our half-rotten and now mutated friends. As usual, let's start with the story and the setting. When we start a new game, we will not see any intro, and not even a text which informs us about the setting and the situation we are in. We are just arriving in this post-apocalyptic world, which consists of withered trees, roads and some abandoned locations, and which of course is inhabited by different types of zombie mutants. The very first bit of actual story is being presented to us once we build some radio tower and we receive some signal, but it will probably take us a few hours until then. This is then also one of the 4 or 5 quests or tasks in the game presented to us in the top right corner of the screen, if we get the idea to actually press the small arrow button there. And there isn't much more to say about the story already. Of course, I would have liked to see more. Even a single intro piece with some text would have been better, just to set the mood for the player and to create a bit of atmosphere. In the Dead Age games, the story and quests contributed a lot of the fun to the games and were some of the main elements. However, both Dead Age titles were also much longer in terms of total playtime, and as the structure of story was not flexible at all there, they lost a lot of replayability. Of course, Mutant Meltdown avoids that disadvantage, but to neglect the story aspect completely and not even having an intro screen and some random events or a few more tasks, I'd consider as wasted potential. In difference to Dead Age 2, we are starting on a randomized map whose parameters we can set ourselves before generating it. Besides of the general difficulty, we can also set the zombie spawn rate, how much radioactive fog we want to have, and a couple of other things, including how big the actual map should be. A bigger map would also mean that the random element of the game would increase a bit, as important locations might be a bit harder to find and might be farther apart of each other. We will also choose which of the 3 save slots is being used for the automatic saves. While we can take a break and leave the game to continue later, the save game is always updated automatically, and we cannot return back to a previous state if we messed anything up. So if we bite the dust, then that's it. And I think in that regard, there would have been some potential to also add some roguelite mechanics, like unlocking different party setups at startup or anything like that, which gives some additional motivation for restarts. But unfortunately, there's nothing of that in the game. Once we confirmed the settings and arrived in the actual game, we are greeted by some tutorial texts. But if you expect to actually learn a lot of useful stuff from these texts, I got to disappoint you. Besides of the info that there are individual character inventories and a group inventory, that we can freely move the camera on the world map and that we can split up our party, we just get the info that we should chop some wood and build a camp at a sufficient spot, which shouldn't be directly on the road, as that's where more of the zombies can be expected. So where should we set up camp instead? Well, certainly not in the middle of the forest, that would actually be even worse. Instead, we should first look around and check out the vicinity. Next to the roads we will find a lot of locations like gas stations, towns, industrial zones, nuclear power plants, and also real cities. And we should also have a good idea about what we can find in each location. For example, we will be able to find the one or another tin can with food in the gas stations and towns, which will be especially helpful during the first days. In a military camp we will mostly find weapons, and in an industrial zone we'll find items to scrap for material, but also some tools serving as weapons. So we should look for these locations and then set up camp a few hexes away from that. In order to find a fitting spot, it can also be beneficial to split up the party and to spread out, so that we can explore a vast area in a short amount of time, especially as in the first turns only very few zombies are roaming around. Just be aware that the game does not provide any assistance in regards of remaining actions. Characters usually have 2 action points, and if we are running around with 3 groups and only moved 2 of them before clicking on end turn, we will not get any warning that we forgot to move the last one. And there is no overview where we could see the action points of all our parties either. Let's take a look at our 5 randomly generated starting characters at this point. First of all, each character has 5 attributes. Strength and focus are directly added to the melee and range damage respectively, which then results in the total damage. Every character will receive one of each type of weapons very soon, and we will usually either attack in melee or ranged with a whole party, so it pretty much doesn't matter if the strongest character receives the most powerful melee weapon, or you just randomly distribute them, as the sum of the damage will be the same in the end. The endurance calculation is also very simple. Every character just got 10 base hit points, and the endurance value is added on top of that, resulting in the total hit points. Speed is determining how often the character will evade enemy attacks, though the game does not give any information about the efficiency here. And lastly, we got intelligence, which reflects how much the character is contributing to any crafting in the camp. Not that it would make a lot of sense that our professor would be the fastest of the bunch to repair a car or fiddle together some ammunition, but well, let's just consider intelligence as craftsmanship in that regard. Besides of that, each character also got perks, which can come from 3 different sources, each with a different set of perks. Each character got a starting perk reflecting his or her background. A cook will grant additional healing to all the food the party is consuming, and a politician, well, is good for nothing. The second source for perks are level ups, and there we can select which of the bonuses we want to take, but they are less powerful in comparison. For example, we could increase the damage or the productivity at certain tasks in the camp. And lastly, we got mutations. If the radiation level of the character is at 90 or above, then the character will not just lose a hit point every single turn, but there is also a chance that he gets a mutation, which can have a positive or negative impact. For example, it might cause that the character will need to eat a lot more now, or he's growing a 3rd eye, which increases his perception, which is quite nice to have, I guess, but probably not worth the risk. During the course of the game, we will find plenty of armor and weapons accordingly, which will then also boost the damage values and the attributes. But let's get back to setting up camp. We found a nice spot, but what now? We need to go into the forest and chop some wood. To build a camp, we need 8 units of wood, and this is important to keep in mind, as 8 free spots in your inventory is quite a bit. It's more than any of your individual characters will have at the start of the game, meaning you would definitely need a group to create a camp. And you should also not try to loot a lot of stuff before realizing that you should build a camp now, as you would then need to throw away items to make some room for wood again. So we are running into the woods, and we will tell the group to start chopping wood, which it will continue to do until we give a new command. After that, we are moving onto a free hex field where we want to create our first camp. It's very well possible to create additional camps, but of course you will probably want to concentrate on a single one early on. The camp should have a few tiles distance to the next location, so that you have a spot to withdraw to once zombies approach. Furthermore, there should be a couple of empty hexes within the radius of 2 tiles, so that you can build some farms later on when the required water tower has been built, which is one of many buildings we can build once the camp has been set up. The camp can also be used to storage items and to scrap them for raw materials which we need to craft these buildings or other items. Of course, we don't have anything for scrapping just yet, and so we go to a nearby location where we can search for loot. Similarly to chopping wood, we only give the command once, and then turn for turn we get the notification that we found something new. Unfortunately, that's as precise as the notification gets. Instead of just showing us what we got, we need to look into our inventory to check what type of item we actually received. As mentioned before, in regards to the missing action point overview, this would have been an easy thing to implement, which would have resulted in a much more polished gaming experience. While searching, we'll find the before-mentioned clothes and equipment which we can put on right away, and the much needed food. As long as we haven't built any farms yet, we rely on finding food to not starve to death. We can also find additional companions, but of course they need to be supplied with food as well. At the latest, when our inventory is full, it's time to head back to our camp, where we will then scrap the loot, build the buildings and so on. But of course, it's never that easy. Soon zombies will show up, which will continuously push us to making decisions, like whether we want to fight with them to be able to continue our search, or whether it's better to retreat for now in order to save some precious hit points. And if we use rifles to attack them, that noise would then also attract additional zombies from the area, and maybe also nastier ones. Besides of the casual zombies, which only attack normally in melee, we also got a couple of other zombie types. Among these are zombies which don't attack but keep screaming instead, which will then pull further zombies to the area, much like a gunshot. Another important zombie type is the fat zombie, which will attack by vomiting onto the attacked tile, leaving a radioactive puddle, which is especially inconvenient if that was a location you wanted to keep looting. Among the other types is also some kind of mega zombie, which is hatching from an egg in some kind of event, so you got to get there and destroy it before that happens. So you can see that the game managed to provide quite a bit of variety with a rather limited amount of mechanics. While we can also develop our characters, this is not the only way to do something against the zombies. For example, we can build defenses in our camp so that it will offer some protection, though it's important to note that an empty camp will never be destroyed by zombies, and if we find some gasoline and a vehicle which isn't completely trashed, we can either use that to quickly flee the zombies or to ram them, which only makes sense though if we can actually repair it again in our garage. For this reason, we can also push broken cars from field to field, away from the road or towards our camp to be fixed there. And similar as the puddles of vomit, there are also hexes with some radioactive fog all around the map, which you should of course try to avoid to not increase your radiation level. But now and then it will also start to rain, and this rain isn't just radioactive in itself, so that you should find shelter. The rain will also wash away any existing fog, and then after it ends it will create some new radioactive fog on other fields. And that of course can also mean that our own camp will become radioactive, so that you should not spend too much time there until it rains again and the fog is yet again reshuffled. So the game mechanics are all relatively simple, but the way they all work together results in a game flow where the player has to continuously make decisions about what to tackle next and how to react to the new situation. If we run short on food and there are zombies roaming around the nearest town, should we try to clear the village or rather try to find food somewhere else? Do we actually have time for that? Should we build farms or rather hope to find enough food elsewhere? Should we use firearms to not get hit by zombies? Or isn't this worth the ammo and the risk of attracting additional zombies? Decisions over decisions, which make the game feel like the first couple of turns in a game of Civilization, where you first need to find the right spot for a city, then decide which buildings you build first, in which direction you start to research, and where you move out with the first couple of units to explore and to defeat potential barbarian attacks. One thing which I would have liked to see in the game is a stronger emphasis on the individual characters and their abilities. For example, that you would consider leaving characters which are very good at crafting back in the camp in order to stock up the ammo supplies, or if you send out individual faster running characters to explore the map or anything like that. But such a split only makes sense in very few cases, just because single characters are just so vulnerable, and leaving behind a single character in the camp is just too risky to be worth it. Therefore, it's preferable to just always keep everyone together, and with that we are back at Civilization, where you would call this a stack of doom in a similar context. On the technical side, the game is kept very simple as well. This is true for the graphics, which you could almost call cheap. Well, besides of the title screen in the main menu, which can barely be considered anything but cheap. And also for the sound. In difference to the games from Spiderweb, which only use music in the main menu, Mutant Meltdown actually does the opposite. While having no music in the main screen, it does have some nice ambient sounds during the normal gameplay. The sound effects, however, are a bit mixed. For example, driving around with the car does sound extremely cheap. But overall, there wasn't anything which I personally found to be extremely annoying. I can understand everyone though who isn't a fan of the depiction of the characters which are only visible from the torso upwards, like in some board game. I came across a couple of minor bugs in the game which I reported, and looking at the patching history of the developer's previous game, which had been patched over multiple years, I'd assume that they will be fixed as well. And with that, we are getting to the conclusion. It will take maybe 1 to 2 hours until you found your way into the game and its mechanics, which is also thanks to the lackluster communication of the game with the player, which in my opinion is the biggest weakness of Mutant Meltdown. A bit more assistance at the start of the game would have helped already, and that's also true for some additional or better notifications. But once you're past that, then all the little but important decisions you will have to make result in some quite compelling gameplay, which will take about 5 to 10 hours for one successful playthrough. The perfect length for a game with permadeath in my opinion. A couple of roguelite elements which changed the starting situation would have been nice though, and they would have given additional attempts a different spin. On my wishlist would also have been some more integration of story. I don't think it is asking for too much to have some intro screen with some text to support the atmosphere and give the player a better idea about what he is actually trying to do. And of course there could also have been something like dynamic events and quests, but even without these, Mutant Meltdown is quite entertaining due to the simple but well-working game mechanics. It's interesting though that its predecessor Z-Dawn is doing some of these things better than Mutant Meltdown. For example, you got some small events there where the character's attributes can increase your chances of success, and the world is feeling more alive as other groups of survivors are roaming around as well. And while you can only have one camp in Z-Dawn, this one will actually be raided by the zombies. The character specialities are a bit more important there as well. Z-Dawn has less items and enemy types and is also missing the previously mentioned features regarding radiation, but overall it appears to be a bit more rounded. And you can certainly argue that the missing radiation, but also the missing item decay, make the game easier to start with. I will give Mutant Meltdown and accordingly also Z-Dawn a rating of 3/4 thumbs up. If after this review you think that the games sound interesting, then you will not be disappointed. But if you expect much more in terms of tactical depth or in terms of storytelling, well, then these games are not for you. They put their focus on a few basic mechanics, which work quite well in my opinion, at least in games of this scope. And the price is accordingly cheap. With just 10 euros for the game without a sale, you can't really do anything wrong if you think the game could be interesting for you. And if you like Mutant Meltdown and would love to do another round with a slightly different setup and different quests, then you can as well check out Z-Dawn, especially if it's in a sale. Or the other way around, they are really that similar. And that's it for Mutant Meltdown. If you liked this review and it helped you to form an opinion about the game, then please leave a thumbs up. And if you aren't a subscriber yet, but you enjoy watching my reviews and previews on this channel, then please consider subscribing. This shows me that I should continue doing these in English language as well. Besides of that, you can also check out a list of all the games I ever played over at ndnw.net. From my early days playing games on the Commodore 64 up until today, all games are listed with some short descriptions and a couple of screenshots. Just be aware that the linked videos there are mostly in German. Thank you for watching, and before some more zombies are barfing into my direction, I'll say goodbye for now, and we'll try to get away and into some more comfortable areas. Hope to see you again next time. Bye bye.